Listen to Steve Bunce on BBC Long 95.9. And now it's a big anniversary this week. It's only fitting to end tonight's show with a tribute to my good friend Michael Watson. Now we all know when his boxing life ended. It was at 10:54 on Saturday, the 21st of September 1991, in a corner of a boxing ring in the middle of the White Hart Lane pitch. Watson was 26 that night when he was led from one corner of the ring to his own corner after taking the final punches. He was gazing over the shoulder at the same time with the referee Roy Francis looking over at Chris Eubank. Francis had a hand on Watson's elbow and he was sort of steering him back towards Jimmy Tibbs, who wasn't best pleased with the way the fight had been stopped. And then Roy Francis screamed at him, "He's gone, Jim, and you know he's gone." Whew, it was very, very dramatic. Tibbs finally did take charge of Michael, and that's when Jimmy said he slumped. He just went. I felt him go. He was on my chest and I knew he was gone. That's what Jimmy said. Now, in the neutral corner, Eubank was his own features smeared with swellings and blood visible on his teeth, was being screamed at from ringside, but he wasn't in a celebrating mood either. In other areas, not far from ringside, fights were breaking out in sections of the 22,000 people in there, and it was a little bit ugly. There were 13 million people watching on TV. I was ringside that night, resting my hand on a spot on a rope not far from where Michael's head had hit on the second rope, right at the end of the 11th round. In fact, the 11th round was unforgettable. Eubank was sent reeling and exhausted to the canvas. He was finished. His eyes a blur as he took some of the count on his knee. The noise was incredible. Nobody was sitting that night at White Hart Lane. And as Michael told me one heartbreaking afternoon, he said, I know that I was thinking about my daughters, thinking about my family, thinking that life would be easy from now on. I would be world champion. And then he said, what else would I have been thinking, Steve? Yeah, you're right, Mike, you must have been thinking that. Eubank stood there, wiped his gloves, and he went straight at Michael. And he managed to land a shot which just dropped Michael instantly. And that's when the bell sounded. At that moment, Jimmy Tibbs and Dean Powell, his assistant on the night, jumped into the ring, dragged Michael back to the corner, and he went out for the next round. But it was slow getting out because Jimmy actually had hold of his feet. He was just trying to gain an extra few seconds. Now, Watson was leading the fight on all three scorecards by round, but by that stage, he was really winning by 3 rounds, 6 rounds, and 1 round now. He only had to survive 3 more minutes, and the World Boxing Organisation's Super-Middleweight title would be his. It would also be sweet revenge for the injustice of his loss on points to Eubank in June of the same year. The bell sounded, and 29 seconds later, it was over. Watson was not throwing punches, and Eubank was throwing too many. It was 11:08. And Michael collapsed into Jimmy's arms. They put him on the floor, and the doctor jumped in to try and help him. There was no emergency resuscitation equipment available at ringside. That all changed after Michael. Tibbs and the DJ, Tim Westwood, and a friend of Michael's called Camel, and a very scared-looking medic actually carried Michael Watson's body from the ring to an ambulance. They went to the wrong hospital, went to the North Middlesex Hospital, arriving there at 23:22. It was the wrong place. There was even inadequate resuscitation equipment there and no specialist head trauma staff. But thankfully, he was resuscitated and one pupil became unfixed. Then he left there at 23:55, which means he'd gone a minute outside the golden hour of essential survival for a head injury. Meanwhile, Dr. Peter Hamlin was having a night away from surgery. Hamlin received a call shortly after Watson arrived at Bart's. Michael had a massive bleed on the surface of his brain. The fighter was prepared for surgery and he went down just before 1 a.m. Now, Hamlin had reached the hospital, but he couldn't get in the front door. There were hundreds of press and people there. So he rushed round the back of the building, trying to get in through one of the old doors around the back. And he was frustrated, annoyed and angry with himself. And then suddenly a door right in front of him, a darkened door, just opened. It was like a miracle. And the person that opened it was, she's called the Bag Lady of Bart's, this legendary woman who lives inside the hospital. She let him in. He raced through. And then the first of 5 procedures took place. Michael, it was all over by 4:20, and Michael was placed in the eerie world of intensive care. His mother goes to his bed, and at 5:10, Jimmy Tibbs went to the bed. I was in the hospital that night. It was one of the longest nights of my life. And as Peter Hamlin said, Michael was closer to death than anybody that I've ever operated on. And the pair are now great friends. And yes, Hamlin does call it a miracle. So he's a scientist who believes it's a miracle. Anyway, that was the story of Michael Watson's last night in the ring. But the fight continues. Michael Watson still out there, still a great fella. You've been listening